welcome back to our third overall reading homeschool connection night, and I've lost track at this point. I think it's about 7 homeschool connection nights total. Tonight we'll cover making inferences and predictions, which we have talked about making inferences in the very first reading homeschool connection night. Never hurts to review those skills. Drawing conclusions, which is very linked to inferences, and author's purpose, which is a brand new skill for us tonight. As always, this workshop will help you to guide your students in helping to review reading quizzes and hopefully catch their mistakes that they've made, and then work towards progressing towards the mastery of those different skills. Again, I've provided you with the papers, so you can feel free to take notes, and the presentation is available on my website because you're currently watching it on my website. We will be going over concepts and test questions in general. If you have specific questions about your child, feel free to send me an email later or just see me afterwards. So the first skill we're going to talk about tonight is making inferences and making predictions, which are pretty linked. The first 2 skills, making inferences, predictions, and drawing conclusions, kind of are a little bit interchangeable. There's just small nuanced differences between the 2 of them, or 3 of them, excuse me. So making an inference, the author's not explicitly going to state what they mean. They're going to have to use what is given in the text along with background knowledge to kind of think beyond the text to determine what may be implied. And a prediction is basically taking that and then taking it to the next level. So it'll give them what has happened in the story. They need to make a reasonable prediction of what will happen next. My Daily 5 reading groups, we were working on predictions this week, and the student said, Mr. B, how do I know if the prediction is true or not true? And I said, well, prediction's kind of a hard thing to say yes or no, because it's, as long as it's reasonable, you can kind of say any prediction's true. But if you're reading a story about like a gladiator in Rome, you say he got onto a spaceship, that's not going to be a reasonable prediction. But other things, there are some fine lines. Always going back to, you want to find the best prediction. Our one story we were reading was about Achilles, and the prediction was what will happen to Achilles later on in life. Well, it said something about Achilles being a strong warrior later in life, and then another answer was about Achilles being shot in the heel by an arrow and dying. They made mention of a small detail in the beginning about the arrow and the heel and all that stuff, so they kind of had to wrap everything together to pick up on that. As we were talking, well, let me back up a little bit. If you were on the field trip on Friday or Saturday, you saw I was kind of going up to students and holding my phone in front of them. They would kind of talk, and they were basically sending voice messages to other teachers all over the country. It's an app called Boxer. I really like it. I recommend, if you have an iPhone, or I think it even works on Android or a computer, you can download it and we can, voice chat between the whole class and all that.
What is it called?
Boxer, Voxer. It's a pretty cool app. And we were boxing with Mr. S is our co-class almost pretty much at this point. And he was boxing. We were boxing to him about what we were doing with our skits and math. And then his students were boxing back to us. And they actually happened to be working on making inferences, which was really helpful as I was making this presentation at the last minute. I actually used a lot of his students' words to kind of help me with this presentation. So this third bullet point, read the link between the lines and find evidence to prove that. That's something that Mr. S's class said to our class. And I just found that to be a very powerful way, because that's basically what making an inference is you need to read between the lines, and you also need to find the evidence to prove that. You can't just make a guess out of left field. You need to have something in the text give you evidence to prove that. So that just really shows how Boxer has come and really helped our class, and it even helped me when I was making this presentation. Clue words for making inferences are going to be, if it says most likely or least likely, most reasonable, words like that. And for predictions are going to be next, after. You're going to see specific examples. Common mistakes with making inferences are going to be attending or just paying attention to just certain points or parts of the text. Like maybe it mentioned like one thing, but it talked about something else, and maybe they focus really on the one thing because it's important to them. They forget about this. Or on the flip side, maybe they just didn't pick up on the one small detail, like going back to my Achilles story. The thing mentioning about the heel was just a small little snippet in the beginning of the passage, and a lot of students just kind of read over that because the majority of it was about him battling. So they need to look at the whole picture. And again, students at this age with their developmental stage, they are still taking things very literally. So inferences is kind of more abstract way of thinking, so sometimes it's a little hard for them to switch from pretty literal thinking to a little bit more abstract thinking. So practicing inference is kind of going to help them get over that hump, because this is around the age where they do switch from the one cognitive development stage to the next one where they can do abstract thinking a little bit better. And not extending the thinking. Maybe they have a good thought and they just don't take it far enough. That's what I mean by extending thinking. So how will inferences or predictions question be worded on a test? First one is going to say, why did the character do blah, 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 blah. If it's not explicitly said, like maybe it says, Jake was hungry, so he made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That is more of a cause and effect question that you can directly answer that from the text. An inference question would be like, Jake ran into his room, he slammed his bag down and started crying in his pillow. Why did he start crying in his pillow? Well, you're going to have to back up and figure out what happened in that story. It's never going to say maybe exactly like he was picked on in school or got in trouble, he had a bad grade. You kind of got to figure that out exactly himself. What happened? Because, again, there's a difference between the literal, the cause and effect type question or this. So maybe trying to think of an example. If it says like Johnny went to sleep early, and when he woke up, he went to school and he took his test and he didn't do so well. So what happened? Because he went to school without studying, he didn't do well on the test. So that's kind of a literal cause and effect type thing. What happened? Because it would be more if they can answer that directly on the test, they need text on test. They need to think about it a little further. So the character most likely did what next? That's, well, this one right here. In the future, the Barry family will probably take long drives on weekends, spend more time in their backyard, buy new kites to fly outdoors, or eat in the house instead of outdoors. So that story that comes from our second benchmark, the whole story was basically about the Barry family trying to find a good picnic ground. And at the end, they found that the best picnic ground was their backyard. So they had to realize that the best picnic ground was their backyard, so that was the inference. They never quite come out and say the best picnic yard, or the best picnic is our backyard. So they have to make an inference that they found that the best picnic was their backyard, and in the future they're probably going to spend more time in their backyard. So that's an inference and a prediction right there. You'll see this kind of comes a little complicated a little quickly, because they have to think. A lot of the times we're telling the students, go back and find your support, all that kind of stuff. Inferences and predictions can be a little hard to find through the support because it's not there. They have to use their own background knowledge. So for them to prove their work for inference or prediction questions, they just write a sentence. So for this one, they might write a sentence saying like they tried a bunch of places and found their backyard. So that'd be proving their work rather than just taking a stab at it. So we're going to go through a couple of example questions once we've done in class, either as a whole class activity or a reading quiz, and I'll break down the percentages like we normally do. So this one came from our weekly reading stories through the Journeys series. We read this story. This actually came from Monday, I believe. So the passage said, a trader named Marco Polo traveled with his father and uncle from Europe to China. They were the first outsiders ever to be welcomed to China. They found gold, jewels, silks, and spices never before seen by Europeans. When they reached home, Marco Polo described the advanced customs they had found in China, a postal system, paper money, and the use of coal as fuel. And then that's the end of the little passage about Marco Polo. So the question that I had thrown up on the screen, and they basically are remote controls that they can answer. So it's kind of like they're taking a quiz, but everybody's taking it at one time. I said, what do you think happened after Marco Polo shared the information at his home? So the choices were they began to battle the Chinese, they thought it was a good idea, they started their own versions, and they did nothing. So the two answers that you see the most students did not pick are they began to battle the Chinese, because there's nothing to support that in the text, and they did nothing. Generally speaking, what would be the point in saying that they discovered that? So they had to, so they didn't choose us. But the two, the B and the C, they thought it was a good idea, and they started their own version. Those were thrown in as one's the good answer, and one's the best answer. So the good answer is they thought it was a good idea. Obviously, Marco Polo was very into the Chinese ideas because he wanted to share them. And so I can see why they would choose that. I see the majority of the class did choose that. That is the incorrect answer because you need to use an inference. A lot of times if you come home and you're really excited about doing something, you're going to want to start your own versions of it. So they had to kind of use what was said in the text, that he liked it. He was kind of bragging about it to his family, and they have to use their own background knowledge that if you like something and you want to talk about it enough that you're going to want to implement it. So they could do that maybe like, going back to our green screens thing. Some students started out with finding just one green screen as their background, and then other students found more green screens. So then other students learned about that and wanted to use multiple green screens in their presentation. So that's how they would have the background knowledge to kind of apply that someone else's good idea when you're talking about what somebody else goes into that. So background knowledge is going to be very huge with inference skills. We can see the majority of the class didn't do so hot on this question. There are a couple of students who, as they're clicking, they just get click happy and just click through all the answers. But so we see how that breaks down. The next one, they did much better on this. This one comes from a reading quiz, I believe, Pizza Story. So this was last week's reading quiz. The passage said, "Pizza has become a food enjoyed around the world, eaten in restaurants and at home. It is adapted to suit many different needs and desires, and it will be fun to see what this famous dish will be like in the future. Who knows? There might even be an answer to the troublesome pizza slop." So the question said, based on the information in this selection, what does the author probably being a keyword that's going to say that's going to be an inference, think will happen to the pizza in the future? Future being a keyword that says that's going to be a prediction. So the choices here were that she thinks people will continue to enjoy it, although it might change. She thinks chefs might make pizzas that are all the same. She thinks people will begin to eat the ancient flatbread style pizza, or she thinks chefs will develop more pizzas that look like flags. So D, 10% of the students chose that, which breaks down to about 2 students or so. There's nothing in the text to support about making pizza to look like flags. Sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out why students have chosen the answers. B would be incorrect because it even says right here that it's changed a lot. And A is the correct answer because you need to take the inference from the author, understanding that they're talking about the whole passage about how pizza had changed a lot, but it just became more and more popular as time went on. So nowhere in the text does it come out and say that people will always love pizza, but it's always saying how pizza started very, very many years ago, and it's changed, and people have pretty much continually loved it and will continue to love it. So they make an inference to realize that the author was saying that the pizza was very popular, and with every change, it just pretty much became even more popular. This was from a reading quiz in January, I believe, and it was about, the whole story is about a girl who runs into a homeless man and wants to become more attuned to the problem of homelessness. And so the specific part of the passage reads, she looked up information on how to volunteer to tell her teacher the next day. They could help prepare meals, serve them, and clean up afterward. And the next time Maggie walked down the block, she packed a granola bar and a banana to give to the man she saw on the street. So it says, what will Maggie most likely being keywords for inference, do the next day? So next day being a keyword for prediction in school. So Maggie will try to get to sign, I have the wrong breakdown there. Disregard the breakdown because that's for the wrong question. Maggie will try to get people to sign up at the Bowery shelter. That is the correct answer there because it says here that she's looking up information on how to volunteer to tell her teacher the next day. Never says that she's going to tell the kids to sign up the next day. But obviously, if you're looking up information to share, the goal is to eventually share it. Again, you need to disregard. I apparently was looking at the wrong one. Maggie will tell a few friends about the research. That is a reasonable thing to guess because she's talking about how she wants to help it. But if she's looking up research to tell her teacher, generally the students know if you're looking up something to tell your teacher, it's going to become a bigger deal than if you just look up a couple of things to just tell your friends. Maggie will read books about homeless people in her school's library. She could, but the whole night in that story she was spending looking up research on the internet. And Maggie will paint a picture of the homeless man that she met in the beginning of the story, which that's not a reasonable thing at all. That's just something I came up with. So I wish I would have included the correct breakdown so I could show how the students had answered. But so they had to pick up on the fact that she's looking up information to tell her teacher, and hopefully and she's tasked with a project for the whole class to kind of overtake. And so that's what that's how they would have to do that inference. So ways to practice inferences. You can do this with fiction, nonfiction, newspaper, pretty much any reading material. While you're reading with them, just ask them what might happen next, and also the important part is going to have them support why. So that can happen. Nonfiction, maybe you're reading a story about a war, and they say someone invaded another country. Before you get to that part in the book, ask them why, or what's going to happen next. Have them support why. So they could use their background knowledge of those wars. They could use what they know about conflict, but the support why is going to really explain your thinking. And if you're reading a fiction book or even a nonfiction like a biography, this would work well. We can ask how the character is most likely feeling and why. That's going to have to pick up on how the character is acting. The character, in a well-written book, it's never going to come out, and the character is going to say, "I am sad," said Jake. It's not going to be a very well-written book at that point. It's going to say something like, Jake was shuffling his feet as he walked in. He slumped down into a chair. How's Jake feeling? The student would hopefully say, Jake is feeling sad. At that point, you would say, how do you know Jake is feeling sad? They would have to point back to the text. At no point in the text does it say, Jake said, I am feeling sad. But they had to take the text and go a little bit above it. So you can even use your daily routine for this. One thing I suggested, but you can adapt this to whatever you do. You can start to get out things to bake a cake, like flour, eggs, milk, whatever else goes into a cake. You can start preheating your oven, and then ask your student, what do you think we're going to, I guess they're your child, they're my students, they're your child. You ask them, what do you think we're going to do? And if they have the background knowledge of what goes into a cake, they see you're preheating the oven, they should be able to predict, we're going to make a cake. If your child doesn't often bake with you, I probably wouldn't do this thing. I would adapt it to something that they do. You can show them that making an inference and prediction is something they're going to do pretty much every day in life. I mean, my students, your children, can pretty much every Wednesday, we do a little reading assessment called the maze, and where they have 3 minutes, they're timed, and they just circle answers of 3 words. So every Wednesday I say, it's Wednesday, what are we about to do? And they know it's maze day is what they call it. So they use their background knowledge that every Wednesday that's going to happen. Pretty much any structured routine or anything that you know is coming up, you can do that. One activity I talked about, first time we talked about inferences, was kind of give little scenarios. Like I think I give the example of, I'm high up in the mountains, it's very cold, I'm going down the mountain, snow is whipping in my face, what am I doing? And they would make the inference that hopefully they have the background knowledge that I'm either skiing or snowboarding. You could even take it a little step further and say I have 2 things strapped to my feet that would differentiate skiing or snowboarding. They have to pick skiing because snowboard is 1 thing strapped to your feet versus skis are 2. So you can do those kind of things, those scenarios we did. You can even act out scenarios like come in, slam the door, sit down, how am I feeling? Angry, how do you know I'm feeling? That, oh, you just got my progress report. Something like that. So those are some quick, easy ways to practice inferences. Drawing conclusions is going to be our next skill. Drawing conclusions is going to be very much linked to inferences. While Mrs. Burke and I were making this presentation, it's very hard for us to actually kind of put a fine line in between what's making an inference and prediction and what's drawing a conclusion. And what we came up with after looking online for a while is they're basically interchangeable terms. The main difference is drawing conclusions is going to be a little bit more based on the text than the inferences. What I mean by that is drawing conclusions, you're going to be able to find the answers in the text a little bit more easy than inference. Inference, you're going to have to rely a little bit more on background knowledge. The official definition of drawing a conclusion is that it's defined as a decision about what may happen or the result of another event. So then we kind of get into a prediction there a little bit, so you can kind of see how all these skills are kind of interchangeable. They're just kind of worded slightly different on the test. Well, basically, it's the same thing. You can also think of it as another form of cause and effect in an if-then statement. So what I mean by that is if it says in a story that a girl is wearing a jacket, then it must be cold, because you generally don't wear a jacket when it's warm out. So it might not say that it's cold, but it says the girl, it might say something like the girl is wearing a jacket as she's walking to school, and the question might be like, what's the weather like outside? Nowhere in the story does it say anything exactly what the weather is outside, but it says she's wearing a jacket, so you rely on the text. You have the background knowledge to know that when you're wearing a jacket, it's cold. So background knowledge, and again, very similar to inferences. How will drawing conclusions questions be worded on a test? Very similar worded to inference. It's going to say, what can you conclude? The word conclude is going to be a pretty much dead giveaway that they're supposed to be drawing conclusion because they have the same root word. And what is most or least likely, which is the same kind of question that's going to come up with inferences. Cannot stress enough how much these are basically the same skill, just called slightly different things. But you're going to practice them pretty much the same way. You're going to see them asked the same way. So drawing conclusions examples. This is a passage that, I'm not going to read the whole passage, but this is a passage that was from, I believe, last Friday's reading quiz. It was about sharks. And the question was, which of the following is least likely? The choices were finding a great white shark in 85-degree water, finding a great white shark hunting a porpoise, finding a 15-foot long great white shark, finding a great white shark that weighs 2,000 pounds. So nowhere in the text does it say anything about, like, you would most likely find blah, 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 blah. So what they had to do was go back and kind of eliminate. So they would have to go back and they would scan for what temperatures sharks are at. So they generally prefer, it says 54 to 75. 85 is obviously higher than 75. So they can't stop there because they do need to check all four answers. So hunting, great white shark hunting a porpoise, which funny side story here. The biggest question I had on this reading quiz was what's a porpoise? And I kind of have to explain. It's basically kind of a dolphin. But apparently before this point they had never heard what a porpoise was, and I was like, that's not really the main point here. It's about the shark. It just mentions the word porpoise a couple times. But I thought it was interesting that they were curious. I wish I would have.
Well, you are what you eat, so you need to know.
Yeah. So right here it says that they're going to eat a porpoise, so that would be pretty likely. 15-foot great white shark. It says most of them are between 13 and 16 feet. Finding a great white shark that weighs 2,000 pounds, and it says there. So the bottom three options would be pretty likely because it says in the text that those things happen. The top one, it says that it does not happen. So you see that's kind of the main difference between inference and conclusions. This one, they rely pretty heavily on the text. They just had to extend their thought a little bit further versus the inference questions. They had to think further more than relying on the text. They did pretty well in that one. I mean, if we see 80% of it had it correct, which that breaks down to about 18 of the students had answered that correct. So I mean, that's pretty good. That's very commendable. Generally speaking, it's more broken up on correct answers. For inferences, I mean, you saw the other breakdowns. They did pretty well with that. Pretty good with that. Then we go into this one was this was from a reading quiz in like January. So the passage reads, without taking her forehead off the window, Mayor Arnold opened her eyes. What she saw next made her jump with a squeak. A crowd of people were marching up the long street that led to Town Hall, and at the crowd's front was Donald C. Strunk himself. They pumped their fists in the air and waved signs, an anti-juggler protest. Mayor Arnold sighed. It was going to be a long day. Then the question was, while many people are happy to live in a famous town, not everyone is happy about the jugglers. Which evidence from the passage supports this conclusion? So right there it says conclusion. That's going to be a pretty big indicator that they're going to need to draw a conclusion here. Choices were the biggest newspaper in the state capital writes an article about the jugglers. The reason I feel that a third of the students had chosen that was that they focused just on the first part of the question, happy to live in a famous town. Generally, if a big newspaper writing about something, that means it's pretty, not all the time, but if they're doing like a feature article, it's kind of a happy occurrence. Excited crowds gather around the skilled jugglers at the side movie theater. That supports that they're happy to see it. Donald C. Strunk leads the crowd in an anti-juggler protest. So one thing that could have really deterred them, and I know that it deterred a lot of them, was a lot of them didn't know what the word protest meant. So as it came up, I did try to field the question what a protest is without being like, it's when you're really angry about something, because that pretty much gives it away. So I tried to back that. I tried to support them. If the student asked, if the student didn't ask, I felt that. Normally in a reading quiz, if they ask what this word means, it's not something that the question is, what does this word mean? I'll answer it for them. I can't do that during the SOL, obviously. But the one way to build vocabulary is going to be reading with your student, and when they get to a word that they don't know, tell them, dictionary.com, physical dictionary. Only way to build vocabulary is to encounter more words. Go back to this, I get off track a lot. So Donald C. Strunk is hit on the head by a bowling pin. That's kind of what starts the whole story. I'm actually surprised that not as many students chose that, because he was very angry about that, and that shows that he's not happy about that. But that shows that they picked up that that was just about Donald C. Strunk, not a whole group of people. So I think what confused them was the word protest, because that's not a word a lot of fourth graders have. Well, until the segregation day, they had not run into what a protest was. I know some of the students were planning a protest, but so that's how that one breaks down. So this was from our reading quiz this week. I don't have the access at my house to put in the score reports from when we're doing it at home, or from where we're doing the remote control thing. So I apologize I wasn't able to include the score breakdowns here. But so we have two sections from our passage. The top one, this was a really cool story we read this week. It kind of talked about sequoia trees, and it was like half a history lesson and half a science lesson. So it was talking about how the sequoia was growing up throughout the years, and as the sequoia was growing up, it was talking about what was happening in the world as the sequoia grew up. So I thought it was a pretty interesting story. So it said this top part was basically talking about the Pilgrims, their first winter, which, as you know, didn't go so hot. And then down here, it was saying how the trees provided a lot of shelter and resources for the animals. So the question was, how could the redwood trees have possibly helped the Pilgrims in their first winter? And it provided a place to hide behind in battles, could have inspired them to work hard, would have provided many resources, it would not have helped them. So what they would have to do there is realize that down here, it's talking about the trees providing resources for the animals, and up here it's talking about that they needed resources. So they kind of had to pull the two of them together and realize that the tree, if they were on, sequoias only grow on the west coast and the Pilgrims were on the east coast, had location of one of the two have been different, then the first winter would have gone much different. If I remember correctly, I think they did do pretty well in that one, because they did realize that the tree, we talked a lot about how trees can provide a lot of resources. So they were using their background knowledge, and that trees would have helped them. Again, I don't know exactly the score breakdown, but overall they did pretty well in the little clicker quiz. So then this was from our benchmark that we had taken in January, and so the question reads, the author would most likely right there being keyword, that it's going to be a conclusion or an inference, agree that Amelia has a great sense of adventure, became a teacher in order to get a plane, preferred to be a navigator on the longer flights, or had to give up many interests to become a pilot. So the whole passage right here, it's talking about they flew across the U.S. in both directions, world speed records, flew from Hawaii to California, tried to fly around the world, all sorts of the different adventures that she went on. So obviously the author would say that she felt that Amelia had a great adventure, because the whole little passage that you're reading about is Amelia and going on her different adventures. I'm glad that no one picked the B that became a teacher to get on a plane, because they only talked very slightly about her being a teacher, and because she was a teacher, they built her a plane, but it wasn't the other way around. Prefer to be a navigator on longer flights. The only time I believe that they talk about navigator is they talk about her navigator rather than her being a navigator, and had to give up any interest in becoming a pilot. They didn't really say anything about her giving up interest. So, like I said, sometimes it's always kind of hard to figure out why some answers were chosen. But so 77%, still pretty good. That's over half the class, over 2/3 of the class actually picked up on the fact that they talked about a lot of adventures, and then that the author would say that they had, she had a great sense of adventure. So ways to practice this, going to be very similar to the inferences. But like I said right there, many of the strategies that you're using to practice inferences are going to be a lot of the same strategies you're going to be able to use drawing conclusions. But these questions, you're going to want to base it a little bit more on the text. So you might want to give them a specific snippet and say, like, if we're going back to Jake, and not saying I'm sad, but throwing his stuff down and slumping in a chair. You might want to say, Jake just slumped down on a chair. What does that tell you? And so rather than with the inference, you were just kind of you were asking them to figure out, this time you're giving them a specific set of the text, and you're asking them to respond to respond to that set of the text. So that's kind of the big difference between inference and conclusions. Conclusions a little bit more based on text. Inference is based more on prior knowledge. Last skill for tonight is going to be author's purpose. Author's purpose is broken into two main parts. Why they wrote it, and the little acronym that we use is PI, because everybody likes PI. Easy to remember it that way. And that stands for persuade, inform, or entertain. And then the other part of author's purpose is going to be why they chose to include specific details in the writing. Let's go ahead and break those down. Author's purpose, again, going back to the PI, why they wrote it. They're not going to see a lot of questions specifically based like I would be inclined to say they're not going to really find on the SQL specifically find a question like, why did the author write this? To persuade, entertain, and inform. But it's going to help that they have this background knowledge for the second part, which is they will see more. So if they, why they wrote it, persuade, they're either trying to get you to do something, like spend money, go do something, participate in a rally, something, or feel a certain way. Maybe you want the writing might be written to make you feel outraged that something's happening, or feel sad or happy. And inform, is it just trying to give you facts? So information, didn't have it myself. But if they're writing to inform you, they're pretty much just laying out facts. They're not giving you their opinion on it. They're just saying like, for I'll get down there. And then entertain. Entertain is, they pick up on those ones pretty easily. If it's entertaining, it's an entertaining story. It's a funny story. It's a little out there. It's gonna be stuff like, Captain Underpants series, unfortunate events, died of their wimpy kid. Those are entertaining stories. But so clue words to remember persuade is it should, would, opinion words that are trying to make you feel a very specific way. And inform is going to be a factual information. Writing to inform is pretty much always going to be nonfiction. Where, for instance, so what I say is something like, inform would be like, Mr. B is 23 years old. Mr. B has taught for 2 years. I'm just providing facts about Mr. B. But if I say Mr. B is 23 years old, he's the best teacher, you should want to get him, that's a little different. Then I'm trying to persuade you that Mr. B is the best teacher. I'm providing facts. Yes, I'm 23 years old, but I'm trying to persuade you to feel a certain way. Entertain, like I said, they're not really going to ever miss out on the entertain because they've grown up with entertaining stories. It's generally always going to be fiction because fiction's a little bit more entertaining most times than nonfiction, and it's going to be more funnier out there experiences. So big common mistake I see a lot is mixing up persuade and inform because they're kind of linked. A lot of times if you're persuading someone to do something, you're going to be providing facts to back that up. So one passage we've read before, it was a student or not one of my students, but like a student, hypothetical student, was writing why you should be allowed to eat candy for breakfast. And so it was, which is a terrible idea, please don't do that. But it was providing how candy has fruit juice, and it was providing some facts in it. But overall, which goes into the big picture, which is the next common mistake, they were trying to persuade you to do something. So I always tell them that it might seem like they're writing to inform you, but as soon as they throw in something like you should do this, or they're trying to make you feel a certain way, that immediately, no matter how many facts it is, that's going to shift it right to persuade. So they need to, and a lot of the time, it's always going to realize that most reading that you're going to do isn't going to fit into one of those nice three categories. Some part of the writing might be to persuade, some might be to inform, some might be to inform and persuade, some might be to inform or entertain, like Magic Treehouse books. Those are primarily written to entertain you, but there are a ton of facts thrown into those books. So those are a little bit of both. Overall, it's to entertain you, but yes, it is going to inform you a little bit. So it's kind of hard to think that it's not going to always just be one set concrete. Yes, this is to persuade you, inform you, or entertain you. But you got to think overall, what is the author trying to do? Because a lot of time, persuade is going to be backed up with information, but overall, it's trying to persuade you to do a certain thing. So the second part of author's purpose, which is the more common way they're going to see on the fourth grade as well, is it's going to ask why the author chose to include certain details. It's going to ask the students to explain why they chose certain words, settings, descriptions, anything for the story. And this is a little bit harder for the students because students at this age in cognitive development, they're still a little bit egocentric. I'm not saying that your students are selfish, your children are selfish by any means, but it's just kind of how they have a hard time taking the point of view of somebody else. A lot of times, some students are good at it at this age, but not every student. And some students, as you know from other adults, some students have a hard time of thinking of other people's opinions overall. So they might have a hard time thinking in their own shoes. Example for this, in my guided reading groups today, let's see, is that the right? Yeah, I actually even have the right book out. So the beginning of this book starts with, this is the redwood forest. Is it quiet? Not if you listen closely. So that's the last sentence on the first page. When they come to the end of the book, the last sentence in the entire book is, listen carefully, a redwood forest is a busy place. Or, excuse me, do you still think the redwood forest is quiet? Listen carefully, a forest is a busy place. So it started by posing the question, is it a quiet forest? And then it ends the question with saying, it's really not quiet. It asks it again, but it's basically asking, has your opinion changed? So the question I asked to the students were, I said the end of the book, how is the end of the book and the beginning of the book related? And so they looked here and then they looked back, or some students were like, well, I don't know how I don't remember the beginning of the book. I said, well, you have to look in front of you. Just flip back and look. It's that easy. So then they realized that the last sentence is kind of related, and so they were able to pick that up because that was, directly from the text after they had looked back. So then the second part of the question was, why did the author choose to do that? They had a significantly harder time with that because they had to think. Some of the students were like, I don't know, it just sounds nice, and generally speaking, that's not going to be a good answer. So I just had little, mini conferences with them. Well, they posed the question in the beginning. They spent the whole story explaining why it's not a quiet place, and then it's basically gauging your opinion again. And I also bring up a point. A lot of good writing tip is to try to, bring the whole thing full circle. When I'm writing a paper for grad school, I start by basically summarizing my paper, and then the last paragraph is basically a summarized paper. Just like a bookend, you have two bookends, kind of just wraps the whole thing together. So they had an easy time, literally looking and seeing that they started the same way, had a harder time trying to remove themselves from the situation and figure out why they did that. And also, some of the questions, they might not understand how they relate to the story. Like it might ask something specific, and they'll be, looking back for a literal. They have to think a little bit beyond the text. If you notice, all three skills from tonight kind of have a lot to do with thinking beyond the text versus the literal understanding of the story. So these will be worded two main ways, really. Why did the author write this passage? That's going to be the, persuade, inform, entertain. Not going to see that as often, but sometimes it'll say that, but in a longer thing. It'll be like, the author wanted to inform you about blah, 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 blah. I wanted to give you an entertaining story about blah, blah, blah. Why did the author use these words or choose that setting, something like that? Second way is how they're going to see it more often. So this was a question that was on a reading quiz, but I omitted it just because I forgot to actually run that paper through the copier. So the question was, why are the titles such as the original Gummy Bears and what does Stretch use? So the original Gummy Bears, that was for a paragraph about how bears are kind of credited with using or inventing gum because they would chew on the sap of trees. So original Gummy Bears, you see it's kind of a little joke, and it's kind of introducing the bears. What is Stretch? That section was talking about bubblegum and how they put like latex. How they put latex into bubblegum, which I didn't know until I read that passage. Found that a little concerning. There's latex in bubblegum. But so what is Stretch? Little comical way to introduce that. So which is the correct answer to introduce the topic of a section in a funny way. So it is the topic. The one was about bears. The one was about latex. But it was kind of a funnier way than just saying like bears and gum or latex in gum. So the author had chosen to make it a little bit funnier to introduce the topic. Which the opposite of that is introduce the topic in a serious way. Those titles aren't very serious. Well, it was a pretty serious nonfiction piece. Well, it's a serious like drama, but serious like nonfiction. The titles themselves were a little bit more humorous. So this was from a reading quiz we did, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or so. It was called How to Make a Swan. So the question was, how does the author convince you to try origami? She explains the meaning of the word, which in the passage does explain what origami means. She says that you can do it anywhere and do not need special materials, which is right here. There's no cutting, gluing, or drawing. Follow direction, or excuse me. The nice thing about origami is that you can do it anywhere. There's no cutting, gluing, or drawing, which to me, if I don't have to get extra stuff to do a craft, that sounds a little bit more to me than, try to cut out a bunch of stuff. She makes a title in fancy letters, like up here on the head cool designs on the paper. She said congratulations at the end. And it does say congratulations at the end. So all of those are found in the text. Yes, you can find that it did say the meaning of the word. Yes, it says that she can do it anywhere. Yes, the title is fancy letters. Yes, it says congratulations at the end. Correct answer is that she can do it. You can do it anywhere and do not need any special materials, because that's going to be the best way to convince somebody to do something. If you tell someone that something's easy, they're more likely to do it than something that's a little harder. Interesting story, as we were discussing this as a class. One student had said that she had chosen the congratulations as the answer, and when they tell me why they chose what they chose, I like to see why, so I can either say, oh, you have a good point, but here's why that's a good answer, or you're way off, please listen to what I'm about to say to you. So the student said that it does say congratulations at the end, and congratulations is like a nice way of congratulating someone, obviously, and it's a good way to raise someone's spirits. And I said that, and that makes sense. That is the fact that you're going to get congratulations at the end. That is a good way to say that, to motivate someone to do something. But I said that congratulations is all the way at the end. If she never convinced you from the start to start it, then you would never get that congratulations. So A has to happen before B. So that kind of opened her eyes. So her idea did make sense, but she had to think of the overall big picture, which is one of the big things that fourth graders need to work on. All right, so this was, again, from our Sequoia story. If you can't tell by now, I really like that story. So it said, and as I was looking through this to do the screenshot, I realized every page pretty much ended with, and it grew and grew, or it went on and on. And I said, why does the author show grew and grew and grew? And it was to show the word was important, because it sounds nice, to show that it never stops growing, or his keyboard was stuck. I like to throw in just a funny answer for them at the end there. So, but the two that I was trying to distract them with was to show that the word was important, which growing is important in the passage, but the correct answer was to show, just as the show, but just like to show, that it never starts growing. A lot of times if an author is doing repetition in their writing, that's showing either the word is important or it's trying to mime what's happening, like the word grow, growing and growing and growing, it's getting bigger and bigger, growing and growing and growing. The words itself are making the text bigger and bigger, so they had to kind of make that connection. They did do very well in that question, though. So this was from, again, our Journeys book with the little clickers. This was a story about Cesar Chavez, I like to call him like the Hispanic Martin Luther King, because they have a lot of similarities. And so it says, why does the author include some Spanish words on this page? So right here it says la causa, huelga, and there were other words on the page, but I didn't want to screenshot the whole page because it didn't slide. So I said, why did the author choose to do that, include some Spanish words? So they had this. So the choices were Cesar is Spanish, so it relates to his life. They're interesting words. It is trying to teach you a new language, or for no reason, just to waste space. Obviously, that last one is a fun answer. So they had to realize that this whole story, they're talking about Cesar Chavez is of Hispanic Spanish descent, so it relates to his life. So that was the correct answer, because they're trying to make us kind of feel for him. They're also informing us about him, also kind of persuading that he was a great man. So they're using some of his heritage to try to introduce the reader to something new. So if you can see, they again have to kind of think beyond the text a little bit and realize exactly what is going on and why the author is choosing. You'll see none of these questions were really, why did the author write this passage? Why did the author? It's more, why did the author choose to use these specific words or do this specific thing? And they pretty much have to think like, oh, what did that do? One other way, let me make sure it's not up here. Oh, I'll get to that in a second. But one other thing, it might ask about sensory language. It'll be like, which sensory words help create something in your mind? And it'll be like, the cold, wet ice cream felt good on the hot summer day. So you can kind of, feel the ice cream, as you're reading. You can maybe taste a little bit. So sensory language is going to be, again, tied into author's purpose a little bit. These are just two examples of author's purpose. You kind of have to read the whole passage to understand those, so I'll just kind of summarize the passage for you. So why does the author say that many books and articles have been written about Amelia? Again, I have the wrong thing underlined. H is the correct answer there. To get people to read more about Amelia and her adventures. That makes sense. Like, the whole thing is kind of talking about Amelia or her trying to pique the interest. To show that enough has been written about Amelia and her word records. Can never really write too much about someone extraordinary like that. To point out that Amelia continues to be the fourth person long after her last flight. That is supposed to be the correct answer. 41% of it got that. That's in the very last paragraph. It's talking that they're writing, and so it's showing that she's still an important person, even though she disappeared many years ago. And to suggest that writing about Amelia may solve the mystery of her disappearance nothing really supports that. Just because you're writing about something, you're not going to find that person. For us, a lot of the missing cases persons that we watch on like Dateline who would be found by now. So that's how that kind of all breaks down. And then why did the author choose the forest in March as the setting for the story? So this was from our benchmark. The whole overall premise of the story was that there's a fox and like 3 babies, that it was the middle of winter. They needed a home because their den was caved in with snow, and it wasn't just a good home for a bunch of little baby foxes. So foxes live in the forest. Yes, foxes live in the forest, but the in March thing is the more important detail that I had to pick up on it, because it's talking about in March at that time, wherever it was in the story, was a very cold place. And because it's in March is why the mother fox needed to find a new home for her kids. Foxes like to live where it's cold. Well, the whole story is proving that foxes do not like to live in the cold, so not reasonable answer there. To explain why the farmer let the fox stay in the barn. Farmer is not very happy about the fox in the beginning of the story. By the end, they become friends, and it's a beautiful, beautiful moment. But it's the whole reason they chose March is to show that they need a new home because it's cold. All right, so ways to practice author's purpose is going to be, you can just simply ask your students to ask why the author wrote that piece. They need to support their answer and really prompt them to differentiate between persuade and inform. Really good thing to do would be read a newspaper with your student, or like CNN.com, some sort of newspaper outlet. Maybe pick an article that is just like factual about something that's happening in the world. Maybe go to the editorial section. The same concept. I know like there's a lot of hot button issues right now with like education and funding and high stakes testing and everything, and there's a lot of reports about changes that I wouldn't read these with your students because it's going to be a little above their head. I'm just giving you an example. Like there's a lot of articles about how they're changing different testing requirements with No Child Left Behind. Then there's also a lot of opinion articles. So you could use that kind of concept to differentiate between this one's just laying out facts about No Child Left Behind. This one is saying why No Child Left Behind is good or bad, and what's the difference. And you have to focus on if this one's an opinion piece or this one's just kind of a fact piece. Which then will tie into the next way that you should be practicing more often. Ask the students why the author included specific details. Like if you're picking, like if I said, right here I said, it says, watch your step. Most creatures live on or near the forest floor where food is plentiful, the tanning redwoods shelter them from rain, wind, and sun. And I would say, why did the author say watch your step in the beginning? And the student would have to say, well, plants live, the creatures live on the ground. Just a more interesting way to say, to kind of start that paragraph. On pretty much any word, why did they, or phrase, excuse me, not just word, or even just word sometimes. But you can just ask why the author tried to use that specific writing. So that concludes our night. I appreciate you coming in. A couple of announcements here. Well, first and foremost, as always, these strategies, like I say at the end of every night, learning them here is great. Working with your student is going to be what's going to take it to the next level. The benchmark window is between April 1st and April 15th. We will most likely, and there's some inference conclusion words, have a math homeschool connection night by then. So that one will be to review for benchmarks. We will not have a reading one before then. I think the reading one that I'll get into that in a second. But just basically the skills that we've been doing in the Reading Homeschool Connection nights. Just talk with your students about it. As usual, complete the feedback slip. Look forward to seeing you on Tuesday for the math one. Remember, we do have a fractions test tomorrow, provided that the magical weather that I'm not going to say what it is doesn't come tonight. The fractions test will be tomorrow, hopefully. One thing I want to point out that I just did last night on my classroom website, if you go to the calendar link, which has like I can actually just pull up one here. I have posted pretty much all the dates for the homeschool connection nights for the remainder of the year. They are right now listed as tentative nights because if something comes up, then I'll have to change them. But if you just go right here to the classroom calendar, you can see I have them all in there. So you see next month I have tentatively scheduled for April 7th, April 16th, and April 21st. And then while I have you here, I also want to talk about May. May I have them scheduled for, and there's going to be two major differences in May. There's going to be a math one on Tuesday, May 5th, a reading one on Thursday, May 14th. There's going to be a Virginia Studies one. It's going to be our only Virginia Studies reading, homeschool connection night. That one is going to be 6:30 to 8 because I have to fit 400 years of content. So I can't really quite do that in an hour. I can probably do it in 90 minutes. Not quite sure if I can do that in an hour. And then the final homeschool connection night, I'm getting ahead of myself. For this math night here, I know a really cool thing about this calendar, if you click on it, it'll tell you what the topic's about. For that, the May, by that point we will have covered everything in math. So I'll be sending home a form asking you all what you want me to cover on that night. I'll just give you kind of a listing of the standards and you circle which ones you want me to cover.
This is your website or
Yep.
the class?
My classroom website. So this is thinking in advance, but start thinking of any skills that your students might still struggle with. Just have those in the back of mind so when you get the papers home, you know exactly what you want to check off. And we will also go over the SOLs then, exactly what to expect for those. And then our very, very final homeschool connection night of the entire year is going to be May 28th. That one is going to be from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock because you are going to bring your students with you and you students are going to face off with you in math. So
I'm not coming.
you have to come worth double points. So it'll be just kind of fun. We will review all math skills. But like for the parents, you probably are more used to, multiplication with like the traditional way. You guys have to do lattice box and all the different ways that I've taught you. So it'll be a fun experience for your kids, and that'll be about a week before SOLs. Also, it'll pump your kids up for the tests. While I am also talking about SOLs, they have tentatively again scheduled when our SOLs are going to be. I have already put them on the classroom calendar. Virginia Studies is going to be May 26th. That's a Tuesday. That's the day right after Labor Day or Memorial Day. Or which one switched screwed up. Reading is going to be on May 28th. So the same day that the parent-student face off, they'll take the reading in the morning. They'll come and destroy you guys at the night. And then on June 4th and June 5th, will be math. We're splitting it over 2 days. So one day they will do half of the test. The second day they'll do the second half. That's much better than having to take all 40 questions on one day. So classroom calendar, I posted a lot of different stuff. Check it out. But I just wanted to go over that with you. Do we have any questions before I stop the recording?
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Well, you have to keep in mind that I cover in an hour what I cover in weeks with students. So it might seem overwhelming to you, but you just got 3 weeks worth of lessons.
You know what my
right there.
son says? You don't know how to teach like Mr. B does. Oh man, really?
I think that's a good sign.